Sometimes I find myself in therapy, and yes, I'm a therapist giving the advice I'd give anyone. Lean into what scares you because that's where your life begins. But tonight, we're not talking about fears of public speaking, career pivots, or existential dread. We're stepping into the world of bedroom scripts, those little fantasies that whisper, "This feels both thrilling and terrifying." Tonight is an invitation to illuminate those secret spaces with kindness, curiosity, a touch of wit, and yes, a wink. That it's okay to want more. Let's begin by asking ourselves, what if the thing I'm too shy to say is simply part of me? There's something fascinating about the desires we keep tucked away in the corners of our minds, not the obvious ones, the ones we're comfortable saying out loud. I'm talking about the other ones, the quiet whispers that show up when we're drifting off to sleep, or when we notice a scene in a movie that makes us blush just a little, even though no one else in the room has a clue what's going through our head. Most people imagine that desire is supposed to be loud, clear, and straightforward. You like something, you say it, you go for it. But the truth is that so much of what we actually long for sits on the other side of hesitation. Not because the desire itself is wrong, but because voicing it requires courage. And courage, ironically, feels more vulnerable than the desire itself. Think about the times you've held something back, not because you didn't want it, but because you were scared of how someone else might react. Maybe it was a fantasy. Maybe it was an emotional need. Maybe it was just admitting that you're lonely. The same fear shows up. What if I say this and the person in front of me laughs? Or worse, what if they look at me like they didn't recognize me anymore? That's the edge where curiosity and courage meet. Curiosity says, what if? And courage says, I'll try. Together, they open the door to intimacy that goes far deeper than the mechanics of sex. They give us permission to stop performing and start being. What we often forget is that desire isn't just physical. It's layered. Sometimes what turns people on isn't the act itself, but the feeling of being accepted in the act. The rush comes, not only from the touch, but from the knowledge. I showed you a part of me I usually hide, and you didn't run. That why women hide their fantasiosity is intoxicating. But it doesn't come easily because to get there, you have to walk through the discomfort of being misunderstood. You have to risk the possibility that your partner won't share your excitement, or worse, will judge you for it. That's why so many people keep quiet, not because the fantasy isn't real, but because silence feels safer than rejection. And yet silence is its own kind of rejection. Not from the outside, but from within. Every time you silence a desire, you teach yourself that it doesn't deserve space. You confirm the story that what you want is too much, or too weird, or not appropriate. And slowly those unsaid parts of you begin to calcify. I once worked with someone who admitted hesitantly, like she was confessing to a crime, that she wanted her partner to take more control in bed. She looked at me with wide eyes, waiting for me to diagnose her as broken. And what I said was simple. You want to feel chosen, claim safe enough to let go. She exhaled like she'd been holding her breath for years, because what she thought was shameful was actually deeply human. That's the thing about these secret longings. Underneath the surface detail, the rope, the blindfold, the role play is usually something universal. The desire to feel free, the desire to feel powerful, the desire to surrender, the desire to be truly seen. If you peel back the specifics, you'll often find that people's fantasies are less about the act itself and more about the emotional truth inside it. Curiosity is what helps us discover that truth. Instead of jumping to judgment about ourselves or our partners, it asks, why does this matter to me? What am I really craving here? Maybe it's control. Maybe it's vulnerability. Maybe it's simply novelty. Desire always has a reason, even if the reason feels buried under layers of embarrassment. Of course, curiosity alone isn't enough. You can journal endlessly about your fantasies, analyze them from every angle, and still never say them out loud. That's where courage comes in. Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's the willingness to carry fear with you into the conversation. It's saying, this makes me nervous, but I trust you enough to tell you anyway. And here's the paradox. The very moment you confess what feels unspeakable, you often discover it's not nearly as shocking as you thought. Your partner might nod or smile or even say, I've actually thought about that too. The monster under the bed shrinks once the light is in. But sometimes courage means being prepared for a different response. Sometimes your partner won't share your interest. Sometimes they'll need time. Sometimes they'll say no. And that can sting, but it's still better than suffocating your own truth in silence, because at least then you're living honestly. You're showing up as yourself, not the edited version of yourself you think someone else will accept. What makes this even more complicated is the psychology of kink way society layers shame on top of sex. We're taught to be desirable, but not too desiring. We're told to be adventurous, but not too adventurous. It's a double bin that leaves people confused. Do I admit what I want, or do I play the role that seems safest? No wonder so many people keep their mouths shut. But here's the irony. The relationships that thrive, the ones that feel alive, playful, and connected, are the ones where both people dare to reveal parts of themselves that don't fit neatly into the script. The couples who laugh through the awkwardness, who say, okay, maybe not this, but what about that? The ones who recognize that sex at its best isn't a performance, but a collaboration. Courage is contagious in that way. When you risk honesty, you give permission for someone else to do the same. When you say, this is something I've thought about, you're in it just opening the door to your own fantasy. You're signaling, it's safe for you to tell me yours too. And data exchange builds trust in a way silence never could. So maybe curiosity and courage aren't just tools for the bedroom. Maybe they're the foundation for intimacy everywhere. The willingness to ask what if and the bravery to act on it. The openness to explore not only what turns us on, but what helps. Use grow. At the end of the day, what we're all searching for is connection to be known. Not just the polished, socially acceptable parts of us, but the raw, messy, surprising parts too. And nothing builds that kind of connection like daring to. Share what we usually hide. Yes, it's scary. Yes, it's awkward. Yes, sometimes it will go differently than you imagined. But isn't that the point of intimacy? To risk being fully yourself, even when it's terrifying. To step into the unknown with curiosity and courage, and to see what beauty might be waiting. There, because here's the truth. The disarray you're hiding is not a liability. It's a compass. It points toward the kind of connection you actually crave. And the only way to follow that compass is to be brave enough to name it. So, if you're sitting there wondering, should I say this? Should I try this? Should I let someone know what I secretly want? Maybe the answer isn't to silence the thought. Maybe the answer is to lean in, to trust that curiosity brought it to you for a reason, and to trust that courage will carry you to the other side. And just maybe, you'll find that the very thing you were afraid to reveal is the thing that sets you free. We all walk around with a script in our heads. Not a literal one, of course, but a kind of silent manuscript about who we're supposed to be, what we're supposed to want, and what's acceptable to ask for. Most of us don't even realize it's there because it was written long before we became aware of it. It's handed to us in pieces by family, culture, religion, movies, even the offhand comments of people we once admired. Over time, these pieces stitch together into a story that quietly whispers in the background, this is how someone like you is supposed to behave. And the thing about this hidden script is that it doesn't announce itself. It doesn't say, by the way, I'm shaping your choices. It just lurks directing our actions, especially first kinky thing women crave places where we feel most vulnerable. And one of those places, unsurprisingly, is in the bedroom. Desire is one of the most deeply personal things we experience. It doesn't ask for permission. It doesn't care if it fits neatly into society's template. But the script, oh, it cares. The script is that voice that interrupts your fantasy and says, no respectable person would want that. Or if you say this out loud, they'll think less of you. Or that's not who you are. You're the good one, remember? And so instead of curiosity, we get censorship. Instead of exploration, we get silence. Not because the desire itself is dangerous, but because the script tells us we're not allowed to have it. I spoke with a woman who admitted that she wanted to experiment with role play. It wasn't even something extreme, just the idea of stepping outside her everyday self and trying on another identity for fun. But the moment she said it, she blushed. Her script was screaming at her, nice women don't ask for this. This isn't dignified. What will he think of you if you say it? And yet, when she finally shared it with her partner, his response wasn't judgment. It was curiosity. He didn't think she was strange. He thought she was brave. That's the irony. The hidden script tells us that if we reveal ourselves, people will run. But Sufin, the opposite is true. When you're honest, you create intimacy. When you share the messy, surprising parts of yourself, you invite someone else to do the same. The trouble is the script is relentless. It's not just about sex. It infiltrates everything. Think about how often you've wanted to cry, but heard that voice say, be strong. Or wanted to speak up, but told yourself, don't rock the boat. That's the same. Script at work. Policing your impulses, trimming down your authenticity until you become a neatly packaged version of yourself. But here's the question, who wrote this script? And why are we still following it? Because when you actually pause and trace it back, you'll often find it wasn't written by you. It was written by parents who wanted to protect you, by teachers who valued order more than individuality, by a culture that rewards conformity over honesty. None of these authors had your deepest fulfillment in mind. They were writing for safety, for approval, for predictability. And yet here we are carrying their words into the most intimate corners of our lives. Words that were never ours to begin with. Sometimes the most liberating thing you can do is simply name the script. To say out loud, I'm holding myself back right now because I've been taught that good people don't ask for this. Or I feel shame around this desire because somewhere along the way I absorb the message that wanting equals being selfish. Naming the script doesn't erase it, but it does loosen its grip. And then comes the harder part, asking yourself what's underneath. If the script says you're not allowed to want power, maybe what you actually crave is the freedom to feel strong without apology. If the script says you're not supposed to surrender, maybe what you're really longing for is the relief of letting go. When you peel back the shoulds and shouldn't, what remains is often a very human need for connection, for play, for release. The hidden script also thrives on comparison. It loves to remind you of what other people supposedly want. Other people are normal. Other people fit the mold. Other second hidden desire people don't wrestle with this particular thought, but the truth is the script is lying. Everyone has hidden desires. Everyone has moments of contradiction. Everyone has impulses that don't line up with their curated image. You're not the allure, you're just human. And isn't that the point of intimacy? To be human together, to set aside the polished script, and let someone see the real improvisation happening inside you. Isometims think about relationships as a stage. Most of us perform our roles well. The supportive partner, the attentive listener, the reliable friend. We know our lines, but backstage, that's where the unscripted self lives. The part that's tired of pretending, that longs to say something unsayable, and the people we love most. They're the ones we secretly hope will follow us backstage, sit down in the dark with us, and say, "It's okay. You don't have to perform here." That's what happens when you share what's been hidden. You invite Samin backstage. And while yes, it's scary, it's also the very place where real intimacy is born. So the question isn't, do I have a hidden script? Because we all do. The question is, am I willing to challenge it? Am I willing to notice when I'm censoring myself? Am I willing to risk a moment of vulnerability in exchange for the possibility of connection? The hidden script will always whisper. That won't stop. But you get to decide how much power you give it. You get to decide whether its words become law or just background noise. And sometimes the bravest thing you can do is gently close the script, hand it back to its invisible authors, and start writing your own lines. Lines that sound less like obligation and more like freedom, less like what will people think, and more like what do I actually feel? Because the truth is, the hidden script isn't really about sex at all. It's about identity. It's about whether you're living as the person others told you to or the person you really are. And when you choose the latter, even if your voice shakes, you step into a life that feels truer, richer, and yes, more intimate. So maybe the invitation here is simple. Next time you notice you're still pulling back from something you secretly want to say or do, pause. Ask yourself, is this me speaking or is this the script? And if it's the script, maybe that's your cue to close it for a moment, to breathe, and to see what happens when you speak in your own unscripted voice. Because underneath the script, you might just find the version of yourself you've been waiting to meet. If there's one thing I've learned about intimacy, it's that the body can't go anywhere. The heart doesn't feel safe. We often imagine sex as something purely physical, touch, attraction, chemistry. But beneath all of that is an invisible layer that either makes everything flow or makes everything feel like a performance. That layer is emotional safety. Think about it. You can be with someone who looks like they just stepped out of a magazine cover and still feel completely alone in their presence. You can go through all the right moves, check every box, but if you don't feel safe, if you're guarding yourself, editing yourself, worrying about being judged, you're not really there. You're in it in your body. You're in your head, and that disconnect, that's where intimacy dies before it even begins. Emotional safety isn't glamorous. It doesn't show up in the movies. Nobody makes a blockbuster about a couple sitting across from each other saying, "Hey, I trust you enough to tell you this part of me." But in real life, that's where everything starts. Without it, you're just two people in the same bed rehearsing lines from a script you third secret fantasy didn't even write. With it, you're free. Free to laugh, free to be messy, free to surprise yourself, free to let go of the armor you wear everywhere else in the world. What makes emotional safety so powerful is that it isn't about perfection. It's about presence. You don't need someone who has all fiends' words. You need someone who makes it okay to ask the questions. You don't need someone who guarantees they'll always get it right. You need someone who shows you that even when they don't, they'll stay. They'll listen, they'll repair. So many people come into relationships carrying the scars of past experiences. Times when they were laughed at for opening up. Times when were rejected. Times when their vulnerability was used against them. Those memories get stored in the body. And every time they think about buying open again, those old voices rise up. Remember what happened last time? Don't risk it. Just keep it to yourself. That's why emotional safety has to be built, not assumed. Attack as consistency. It takes proof over time that when you take a risk, whether it's admitting a fear, sharing a fantasy, or even just saying, "I need you right now," you won't be punished for it. You'll be met with curiosity instead of criticism, compassion instead of contempt. I remember a man who once told me that the most erotic thing his partner ever did wasn't in the bedroom at all. It was the night he admitted with tears in his eyes that he felt ashamed of his body. He expected her to dismiss him, maybe even to roll her eyes. Instead, she looked at him, touched his face gently, and said, "You're safe with me." That moment didn't just change how he felt about his body. It changed how he felt about desire. Because for the first time, he realized intimacy didn't require him to be flawless. It required him to be real. And that's the paradox. The very thing we think will drive people away, our honesty is the thing that draws them closer. When you create safety, you give permission for the parts we usually keep hidden to come out and breathe. You stop performing and start relating. And suddenly, intimacy isn't just about sex. It's about connection in the truest sense of the word. But let's be honest, building that kind of safety isn't always easy. It requires unlearning the old rules many of us grew up with. Rules like don't show weakness, don't need too much, don't rock the boat. These rules may have helped us survive in other contexts, but in relationships, they're a poison because they teach us to wear masks. And masks, no matter how convincing, always create distance. So how do we build something different? It starts with small acts of bravery, saying that hurt my feelings. Instead of shutting down, admitting, I'm nervous about this. Instead of pretending to be confident, asking, can we try it this way? Instead of silently hoping the other person will read your mind. These are the little bridges that lead to emotional safety. Not grand declarations, but quiet, consistent risks that say, I trust you with me. And on the other side, it takes listening. Really listening. Not listening to reply or to defend or to fix, but listening to fourth powerful turn on, understand. Sometimes emotional safety isn't about what you say, but about the way you receive what someone else says. If they feel heard, if they feel held, they'll risk sharing again. And each time they do, the safety deepens. Of course, there will be mistakes. There will be moments when you're too distracted, too tired, too human to respond perfectly. And that's okay. Emotional safety isn't about never messing up. It's about what happens after the mess up. Do you dismiss the other person's hurt, or do you own it? Do you hide, or do you come closer? Repair is the unsung hero of intimacy. Every time you choose repair over retreat, you're enforced the message, you matter, we're safe. One of the most common misconceptions about desire is that it thrives on novelty alone. People think we need new tricks, new positions, new adventures. And sure, novelty can be exciting, but the real fuel of desire is safety. Because only when you feel safe can you actually let yourself go. Only when you feel safe can you allow yourself to be playful, uninhibited, unedited. Safety is what makes novelty possible, not the other way around. It's like a paradox. The more secure you'll feel, the freer you become. It's the opposite of what the script tells us. The script says, keep your guard up. That's how you protect yourself. But intimacy flips that lower your guard. That's how you connect. And when you connect, that's when the spark actually means something. So maybe the real question isn't how do I become more adventurous, but how do I make it safe for both of us to be adventurous? How do I create a space where laughter is allowed, where awkwardness isn't fatal, where trying something new doesn't? Risk humiliation, but invites discovery. That's the foundation. Without it, everything else feels hollow. With it, everything else feels alive. What's most beautiful about emotional safety is that it doesn't just stay in the bedroom. It spills out into every part of the relationship. When you know you can be honest without fear, you argue differently. You listen differently. You love differently. And that trust becomes a soil where everything else grows. So maybe tonight the invitation isn't to come up with a list of daring new fantasies. Maybe it's simpler to ask yourself, does my partner feel safe with me? Do I feel safe with them? And if not, what's one small risk I can take to change that? Because the truth is, we can't experience intimacy without risk. We can't experience closeness without exposure. But when safety is present, when you know that, your heart can show up as it is. You stop surviving and you start living. You stop hiding and you start belonging. And in the end, isn't that what we all want? To belong, to be known. Not just for the parts of us that look impressive, but for the fragile, messy, tender parts we usually guard. Emotional safety is the foundation. Not because it's the most dramatic part of intimacy, but because it's the most human. It's what allows us to bring the whole of who we are into the space between us. And maybe that's the greatest turn of all. Not just being touched, but being trusted. Not just being wanted, but being known. There's this funny thing about intimacy. For all the seriousness we bring to it, sometimes the most healing, liberating, and connective thing we can do is laugh. Not the kind of laughter that mocks or dismisses, but the kind that diffuses tension. The kind that says, oh, thank God you're human too. Because let's face it, sex is awkward. It's messy. Its fifth daring request involves bodies that make strange sounds, moments that don't go as planned, and silences that can feel 10 times louder than they actually are. And yet, we walk into it expecting everything to look like a movie scene. Perfect lighting, perfect timing, perfect choreography. We forget that real life is not scripted. It's unscripted. Which means sometimes the most important skill in intimacy isn't seduction. It's humor. Humor gives us permission. Permission to be imperfect. Permission to stumble. Permission to admit that trying something new might feel scary or ridiculous. Without humor, vulnerability feels terrifying. With humor, it feels survivable. I once knew a couple who decided to experiment with a little role play. They rehearsed their lines, they set the scene. They were ready for it to be this sling cinematic moment, except when she walked into the room in costume, he burst out laughing, not because he was making fun of her, but because he was nervous. The tension had built so much that laughter was the only way his body could release it. For a split second, she felt humiliated, but then she laughed too, and suddenly, the whole scene shifted from performance to play. They stopped trying to get it right and started enjoying themselves. And in that shift, they found the intimacy we're looking for. That's what humor does. It flips the script. It takes something that feels heavy and turns it into something light enough to carry together. We underestimate how much pressure we put on ourselves in intimate moments. Pressure to look attractive from every angle. Pressure to perform like we're in a film. Pressure to always know the right thing to say. And pressure is the enemy of pleasure. The more pressure you pile on, the less room there is to actually feel. Humor, though. Humor relieves the pressure valve. It says, relax, this isn't aidist. This is two humans figuring it out together. What I love about humor is that it's inherently connective. You can't laugh alone in the same way you laugh with someone else. Laughter is contagious by design. When you share a laugh with your partner, you're sharing a signal. We're in this together. We can handle the weirdness. We can survive the awkwardness. And that signal makes it so much easier to try something new. Because let's be honest, trying something new is always a little awkward at first. It doesn't matter how confident you are. Stepping into unfamiliar territory brings nerves. Maybe you trip over your words. Maybe you forget what you're about to do. Maybe something falls off the bed at the worst possible moment. Without humor, those moments can feel catastrophic. With humor, they become part of history you'll laugh about later. And that's another thing. Humor creates memory. The moments that stick with you aren't the ones where everything was perfect. They're the ones where we laughed so hard we couldn't breathe, where we broke the tension with a shared smile, where we turned what could have been embarrassing into something endearing. Those are the moments that make intimacy feel alive, not staged. But humor also does something deeper. It gives us permission to reveal the parts of ourselves we usually hide. Think Abatho, often someone admits something vulnerable with a nervous laugh. I've always wanted to try this. Please don't think I'm weird. The laugh is a shield, but it's also an invitation. It says, I'm risking honesty here, but I need to know you won't judge me. And when the other person laughs with you in that warm, reassuring way, it transforms the risk into safety. Suddenly, you're not alone in your vulnerability, you're connected. There's also something profoundly humanizing about humor. Desire can sometimes feel intimidating, especially when it comes wrapped in seriousness. But when we laugh, we remind each other that beneath the fantasies and the roles, we're just people who get nervous, people sixth intimate secret woe trip over each other, people who sometimes have no idea what we're doing. And that reminder is grounding. It brings us back to the reality that intimacy isn't about flawless execution. It's about shared humanity. Of course, not all humor is created equal. There's a difference between laughing with someone and laughing at someone. Humor that mocks, belittles, or dismisses creates shame, not safety. But humor that is inclusive, that says, we're both in on this joke, we're both ridiculous together. That kind of humor builds trust. It deepens the bond. It says, even if this doesn't go how we imagined, we'll find our way through with laughter. What fascinates me is how often laughter shows up in therapy sessions where people are talking about the most tender parts of their relationships. They'll say something like, I know it sounds silly, but, and then chuckle nervously. And that chuckle, that's a bridge. It's the crack in the armor where the truth slips out. And often the truth is that they just want permission to be imperfect, to be playful, to not have to get it all right. We tend to think intimacy is about grand gestures or profound confessions. But sometimes the most profound thing is a shared law. A laugh that says, I see you, flaws and all, and I'm not going anywhere. A laugh that says, you don't have to be perfect to be loved. I remember one woman telling me that what made her fall in love with her partner wasn't his confidence or his charm, but the way he handled awkward moments. Once in the middle of an intimate moment, the bed frame broke. Instead of panicking, he looked at her with wide eyes and said, well, I guess that's a good Yelp review for us. She laughed until she agreed. And in that laughter, she realized she felt completely safe with him. Safe to be herself, safe to fail, safe to just be human. That's the gift humor gives us. It takes the weight off our shoulders. It turns pressure into play. It transforms fear into connection. So maybe the invitation here is to stop thinking of humor as something that distracts from intimacy and start seeing it as something that deepens it. Because when you can laugh together, really laugh, you're not just easing the tension. You're building trust. You're saying, I can handle your humanness and you can handle mine. And maybe that's what we're all really looking for. Not someone who can deliver the perfect fantasy, but someone who can walk with us when the fantasy turns into real life. Someone who doesn't flinch when things get awkward. Someone who makes us feel like the mess signs is part of the beauty. Because at the end of the day, intimacy isn't about putting on a flawless performance. It's about being fully alive with another person, how to create a safe space for exploration. And sometimes the best way to feel alive is to laugh until your stomach hurts. To let go of the script, to embrace the imperfection, and to remember that desire doesn't have to be solemn to be meaningful. It can be playful, it can be light, it can be fun. So if you ever find yourself in a moment where things feel tense, where the silence feels heavy, where you're worried you're doing it wrong, try laughter. Let it be your permission slip. Let it remind you that you don't have to be perfect, you just have to be present. Because in the end, laughter doesn't kill the mood. It creates it. Not the polished cinematic mood we've been taught to expect, but real one, the one that belongs to you in all its messy, funny, deeply human glory. So here's what I want you to remember as you step away from this. Whether you're planning to whisper these fantasies to someone you trust or just carry them as your own quiet truth, you don't have to be ashamed of what you secretly want. In fact, those impulses, when nameable, when acknowledged, become a doorway to deeper intimacy with yourself and others. Therapy taught method, the stories we hide often define us more than the ones we proclaim. And sometimes the boldest act of self-compassion is owning your desire without apology, without shame. Thank you for letting me talk to, well, you. And if tonight's takeaway is one thing, may it be this. What secret isn't wrong? It's just waiting for a brave moment to be spoken.